not month of the year.
Hi, I'm Lil.
And I'm Fitz.
And you're listening to Knock Once for Yes. Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome to a chilly and wintry episode of Knock Once for Yes. Autumn has turned to winter, bringing with it misty mornings rhymed with frost and long, dark evenings best spent around a fire. It's turning out to be more of a long, dark winter than normal for a lot of us, with the UK having been plunged back into lockdown 2.0 on Halloween night. But we can't think of a better way to while away the time than to share some deliciously spooky stories with friends. And we've got a whole episode dedicated to just that for you today. So Fitz, what have we got coming up on today's episode?
Well, quite a lot of you have been asking recently about the podcast that we listen to and asking for recommendations. So rather than just give you a list, we thought we'd go one better and bring those podcasters right to you by asking them if they would share their own paranormal experiences on the show. So, alongside a jam-packed lineup of true listener experiences, we're also going to introduce you to some paranormal podcasts that we may not have mentioned on the show before, as the hosts share their personal spooky encounters with you.
Of course, this is by no means a definitive list of all the podcasts we love and listen to. We have mentioned a lot of our favourites on the show before, and we've even had some of them on the show with us. But we wanted to bring to your attention some of the shows you may not have heard us mention. But before we get stuck into all of that, we want to say a big thank you to our latest patron, Mystica Fairy.
And thank you to Elizabeth Lavoy and Raymond for upping their pledges.
And thank you to Chan Amphlett and Kelly for donating via Coffee. We are so grateful to all of our supporters. You guys really do make it possible for us to continue doing this show that we love and bringing it to all of you. And that is amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, I believe that Lil has our paranormal radar story for this episode coming up shortly, but I just wanted to give you a very quick update on the paranormal radar story we brought you back in episode 47 about the filming of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here at Grit Castle in Wales. Now, apparently Grit Castle is haunted, and it didn't take long for the ghost stories to begin, as it was recently reported in the newspapers that the crew working on the show have begun to see faces in the windows of derelict parts of the castle, and are now refusing to go into some areas and only working in groups in others. Even those that don't believe in anything paranormal are reluctant to work in certain areas. One of the papers reporting on the story is The Sun, and they have a picture of what they're calling a mysterious figure in one of the windows. I must admit that I'm not sure what to make of it. It isn't clear enough to definitively say either way, and a comparison photo of the same place in daylight would have been nice. As usual, I'll put links to the story in the show notes on the website, so do check it out and let us know what you think. Personally, I suspect that it could just be an internal doorway that's in shadow.
Having looked at the picture, I have to agree. Without seeing a comparison in daylight, as you say, it literally could be anything. And we don't know what part of a castle the picture's taken in. It could be a person.
Mm-hmm.
But it is interesting though, and to be honest, I think I would have been slightly disappointed if there hadn't been any reports of ghosts and strange noises and things as they were doing the filming, because it's a notoriously haunted castle. You've got to imagine that some of the crew or cast are going to experience something. So I'm pleased from that respect. And the other thing that's interesting is that they do mention in the article that some of the experiences have been in abandoned parts of the building. So when we were looking at the news story last time, we sort of figured out, we haven't visited the castle, unfortunately. It is going on top of the bucket list. I would like to go. But having not been there ourselves, we just sort of figured out that some parts of the castle have been renovated, been made safe for visitors. So you can visit internal parts of the castle for some parts, but other parts are essentially derelict. They're very run down. Yeah. They're not safe for visitors. So they're sort of closed off. And I imagine that they're also closed off to filming if they're not safe. So there will be parts of the castle where there shouldn't be people. And if they're seeing faces at the windows and hearing noises from those parts, then that is very interesting.
That seems to be the impression that they're giving in the article. They're not necessarily outright saying it.
They're being a little bit deliberately vague, I feel. But if that's the case, then yeah, I'd love to know a bit more about that.
So, yep, do check out the picture. Let us know what you think, especially if you've been to the castle and you've got an idea what it might be. But now, our Paranormal Radar story of this episode.
Back in September, we spoke to Haunt Me, an awesome paranormal investigation team and web series from Maine in the USA. And one of the things we'd particularly wanted to discuss was their use of building blueprints as an investigation technique. At one location, the team plotted all the unexplained sightings and experiences within a building, and through doing so, they discovered that the paranormal hotspots on one floor were also paranormal hotspots on the floor directly above. So the experiences seemed to be happening in columns of activity stacking up through all floor levels. We were fascinated by this, and it's a really great example of why you don't always need the most high-tech equipment to get the best results. Well, for any of you who may want to try out this technique for yourselves, it would be worth you popping over to check out the Higgy Pop website, as they've made a start on a collection of blueprints of some of the most notoriously haunted buildings in the UK, and they're available to view for free. You'll likely recognise some of the famous places included, such as 30 East Drive, that's the Black Monk House, the ancient Ram Inn, and the Cage in Essex, amongst others. As Higgy Pop themselves explain, they're great for planning your paranormal investigations or to give you a better understanding of the building in order to debunk activity, or simply picture where famously documented activity happened. And that is interesting actually, because one of the locations is not a building that's open to investigators, and that's the house of the Enfield haunting, which, as I understand it, is still a private residence. But it was such a well-documented case that it would be pretty easy to dig through that information and plot the incidences of activity on the floor plan. I really love maps and plans, and I actually just want to go and do that right now. I hope they add more plans in the future, or maybe sometime somebody could start a website dedicated to collecting floor plans of haunted houses around the world. That would be so cool.
Well, it's very nearly story time, but first we have a listener's letter from Rachel, and she got in touch to say, "When I was 9, we moved house. My dad had had a workshop in the garden on this property my whole life, and when the old man who lived there died, we purchased the old house and its outbuildings, which we nicknamed the Sheds. It was a falling down, wonky 3-story building, which I believe used to be an ironmonger's, which as kids was great fun. The house was derelict and needed completely renovating, but to start with, we lived in it as it was. There was a ladder instead of stairs, the ceilings were falling in, and the toilet was outside. You had to use bricks as stepping stones, as the washing machine pipe also went in there and would occasionally flood. One day I climbed the ladder and went upstairs, and in the room we were converting to a bathroom, in the corner was a man sitting in a chair reading a newspaper. I legged it, jumping down the floors, not even bothering with the ladder. My parents asked me whatever was wrong, and I explained what I'd seen. My mum looked at my dad and then told me that's where Vic would sit every day and read his paper, with Vic being the man who'd lived there and recently passed away. They never assumed it could be anything else, and even to this day believe it was him. All the times I'd been to visit him growing up, I'd never been upstairs in the house. My sister said she woke up a few times to see a man looking over her. She said she was never scared, and it felt like a comforting feeling. I like to think he was visiting us and happy that our family had moved in and was making it a home again."
Thank you for that, Rachel. At least it doesn't sound like a particularly sinister ghost. That just sounds like somebody going about there every day and not really being ready to leave.
No, I love stories like this. The sort of mundane stuff, who's just sat in a corner reading a paper and just doing what he would have done. And that comforting feeling, I know exactly what that feels like. That's precisely what our sort of friendly ghost thing seems
Resident
to do.
spirit.
Yeah, it feels just like that. It's comforting. It's like having a friend with you. So yeah, I really love stories like this. And swiftly moving on now, it's time for our first listener story, and this one comes from Rebecca, who is the editor of the Ghastling magazine, which devotes itself to fictional ghost stories and tales of the macabre. And if you want to check out the Ghastling, we'll put links in the show notes on the website, and we do recommend that you do.
I've grown up on ghost stories. My mother has an extensive portfolio of strange encounters. I too have a few, my first at the age of 3, when, on a walk in the countryside, we came to a bend in a river. Everything suddenly felt eerily quiet, and I became very upset, pointing to the field alongside, saying, "Man there! Man there!" Neither of my parents saw anybody, and alarmed at my distress, picked me up and ran. As soon as they got past that particular area of the river, the birds began singing again. I think I do believe in ghosts, but more in terms of time slips and the stone tape theory, and this is something I wanted to tell you about. In 2017, my partner and I bought an old Victorian miner's cottage in the South Wales valleys. Amazingly, it had been in the same family since it was built in 1890, and the lady that sold it to us was able to tell us exactly how the house had been changed, where the original rooms had been, and where the old staircase was. She was also very keen to tell us that nobody had died in the house. People had only been born there, and it was a very happy home. But so much so, the house had been empty for 5 years while she waited for the right people to come along. Us. I was pregnant with our daughter at the time, and she was delighted that it was going to be a family home once more. Another detail she told us was that the front room of the house was always used for the family wakes before being taken to the nearby village for their final resting place. She gave us a few details, some names, one of which had died as a result of injuries in World War I. In early spring 2018, I came downstairs at around 5:30 a.m. to use the bathroom. It was getting light outside, but the curtains were still drawn, so it was fairly dark. I blearily went through the living room, which had once been 2 separate rooms, the good front room and the old kitchen, to the bathroom, which is situated at the back of our house. As I was coming back into the living room, I saw the body of a young man lying across the area where our dining room table stands, in some form of military uniform, with his arms folded across his chest, lying in wake. There were flowers around him too. I have a distinct memory of his eyes being open. And in a matter of seconds, the scene just disappeared, and it was just my front room and dining table again. I don't know what to make of this, but it was the centenary of the end of World War I that year, and I felt whoever it was I saw was just reminding me of the history of this house. Perhaps whoever is living in this house 100 years from now will see the same thing, and it will carry on just like this. Or perhaps I had the centenary in my subconscious, and my mind was playing out an imagined memory from the stories I'd been told by the previous owner. The house isn't spooky. It's warm and friendly, and I think it likes us being here. I do often hear what sounds like footsteps crossing the bedrooms upstairs. Perhaps there's another time slip I've yet to encounter. Who knows?
Oh, that was an interesting story. There's a couple of good ones there. And yeah, I'm with you. I do feel like there's a lot, not necessarily all, but a lot of these sort of paranormal experiences, they do seem to be a repetition of something that happened earlier.
I mean, we've had a lot of experiences personally that would sort of lend themselves to that time slip theory.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether it's something that's physically taking place in the world or whether it's something that's sort of appearing in your head. Because again, if you think about everything that you're seeing and touching and feeling, all of that is just your brain interpreting electrical signals. So whether there is something physically there that you're seeing, or something is affecting your brain to make you think that you're seeing something, I don't know. Perhaps you're getting the feeling of what somebody else had looking at their deceased relative rather than them actually being there.
And the part about it being the centenary of World War One is really interesting. The anniversary ghosts really fascinate me.
Yeah, they seem very common.
Yeah, well, I can't remember, honestly, whether this is going to sound stupid, but I can't remember whether this is something I've read or something I made up myself. But one theory as to why, in fact, it might have been something we were talking about with Ruth Roper Wild when we had her on the show. Why anniversary ghosts? You know, why do we get these sightings that recur every 10 years or 100 years? And I wonder whether it is because it's like a collective consciousness thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, with the centenary of World War One, hundreds of thousands of people around the world were thinking of that. They were focusing on that, you know, lots of memories or imaginations, all that energy sort of, could it conjure up, or could it raise those like stone tape replays? Could it make them more viable somehow? I don't know. It's just, it's a topic that I find endlessly fascinating.
Interesting. Maybe there's a way we could set up an experiment with our listeners to think about a particular ghost or something at a particular date and time and see if we can get anything.
I love the way your mind goes straight to experiments.
Let me consider this one, listeners. And in an upcoming episode, we may well have a little task for you to carry out.
I like it.
And while we're busy trying to work out how to make use of the collective consciousness of coffee listeners, it's time now for our first podcaster story. This one is from Tessa of the Paranormal Prowlers podcast. We've been on her show a couple of times, so it's only fitting that she join us on ours to share her story.
Hi everyone, my name is Tessa Morrow. I'm an author, and I have Paranormal Prowlers podcast, and I've been investigating the paranormal now for about 10 years. I had the pleasure of having the amazing Fitz and Will on my radio show and podcast, and now I feel so honored that they asked me to be part of their special episode on their phenomenal podcast. I want to talk about something that happened to me back in 2016. I was in one of my favorite places, Tombstone, Arizona. I was investigating at Boot Hill Graveyard. It was on this fateful day that I broke my number one rule as a paranormal investigator. I was disrespectful and I provoked a spirit. Before I get into my argument with ghosts, I need to tell you a little backstory, as it's quite important and will give you an idea of who I was dealing with. The year is 1884. The 5 doomed men are on the gallows, nooses around their necks, as they look on to an angry crowd. William Delaney, Tex Howard, Dan Kelly, Red Sample, and Dan Dowd are about to be legally executed in front of a Tombstone audience. How did these men land up on the gallows of Tombstone? And what does it have to do with me, Tessa Morrow? In late 1883, the group of men who were outlaws and part of the Cochise County Cowboys robbed a general store. This is where things get dicey. This location is where the mining payroll was kept. But their plans were spoiled when it was realized the money hadn't made it to the store yet that day. Too little too late. There were men inside conducting the robbery, while the others were outside standing guard. It came obvious to the locals that something sinister was taking place in that store, and a man named J.C. Tapney tried to walk through the doors. The 2 armed men guarding the place told him, "No way, leave right now." The man didn't, and so the men introduced their friends, Winchester repeating rifles, to J.C. Sadly, J.C. will not survive this encounter. Cochise County Deputy Sheriff Tom Smith was nearby, having a romantic dinner with his lovely wife at the Bisbee house. When he confronted the shooters, they ordered the deputy to go back in the restaurant. But he refused, saying that he was an officer of the law and he couldn't walk away. One of the cowboys said, then you are the one that we want," and shot him dead. It is then that one of the owners of the Bisbee house, where the deputy was eating, Annie Roberts, heavily pregnant, comes out, seeing what the commotion is all about. The unforgiving cowboys shoot her in the spine. Her and her baby will not survive throughout the night. John Noley, a local freighter, is standing by his wagon when he is shot. He too dies later that evening due to his injuries. A man named Indian Joe, he is shot. But he will survive this brutal attack, and I believe he's the only survivor out of this bloody massacre. The bandits, well, they escape via horseback and head out of town, where they divvy up the money and they go their own ways. Thankfully, eventually, all men will be apprehended. Daniel York Kelly is in Deming, New Mexico. Tex Howard and Red Sample, they're in Clifton, Arizona. Dan Dowd and Bill Delaney left the country and were captured in Sonora, Mexico. It is later revealed that there was a sixth man involved. Not only was he part of what happened, but it is deeply believed that this man, John Heath, was the mastermind. Requesting a separate trial from the others, John was handed a life sentence, where Red, Tex, the two Dans, and Bill were handed death sentences. This did not sit well with the locals. An angry mob formed, broke John out of his little cell, and gave him the death sentence that he deserved. There's a famous picture of John Heath hanging from a telephone pole. About a month later, the 5 men were legally hanged on gallows, specially made just for them, strong enough to hold 5 men. Now you fast forward 133 years later. The year is 2016. I'm investigating Boot Hill. The temp is 110 degrees and it's quickly rising. I sadly had just been diagnosed with having rosacea. It's a skin condition that can be quite painful if not taken care of. I was feeling the effects of not only the heat, but the rosacea settling in. And as I walk through the rows in the burial ground, I'm visiting each and every grave, recorders running the entire time. There's a group of graves that demand my attention. I have a booklet in my hand describing the headstones and who they belong to and how they got there. When I read about the crime these men committed, this horrible crime, I start to get mouthy, something I've never done before or since. I start cursing at them. No matter how horrible the person is, though, I never disrespect or provoke a spirit. To this day, I still widely blame the Arizona heat. By the time I left that graveyard, you guys, it was already a whopping 118 degrees. I start saying how they deserve to be hanged and that they were bad men and just how absolutely disgusting they were. And as I'm leaving, a man is captured on my recorder whispering, "Come back here." Later that night, I would end up investigating a mortuary, a place that is quite active and one of my favorite locations to investigate. It is here at the mortuary that I would capture one of my favorite pieces of photographic evidence. A red noose appears with what looks like a blue figure standing below it. And if you lighten the picture, left of the noose, you can see a man hanging upside down, arms dangling down. It's shortly after this that I fell ill. I had never felt so sick in my entire life. I thought I was dying. I was vomiting to the point where I couldn't even breathe. I felt that an elephant was on my chest. And at times, I'd be sitting there feeling fine when out of nowhere, I would feel like I was being choked or strangled. Literally, the breath coming out of me. My body was excruciating. I felt like I was lifted high in the air and dropped harshly to the ground. Every muscle ached. Every bone was sore. I went to the hospital where they ran tests and everything came out fine. I tried breathing exercises. I tried bed rest. I tried every single thing the doctor recommended. I could find no resolution. I finally went to a friend of mine, a spiritualist trauma healer, and we had a session, which I recorded. And during that session, we caught a man several times in the room talking as if he were part of the session. It was a long event and it was draining for me. Never been through something like this before in my life. I won't go into the whole thing, but I must say it was evident that I had an attachment, but we had no clue who the culprit was. Because you know what? Tombstone was not the only place I investigated while I was there for 2 weeks in Arizona. I was also at Sedona at an old active cemetery and a very active mining town called Jerome, where thousands of people have died. As the session was coming to a close, my friend says the comforting words, "He's ready to leave now." And you know what? I kid you not. As she said this, I was able to take a deep breath, something that was a very huge challenge for me for about a month. I then felt my chest free up. The tension was gone. The elephant was gone. And to my relief, the strangulation was gone. I tell my friend how I wish I knew who the man was who stayed with me for a month. At this point, due to our session, we had pinned down the Bisbee Five. You know, it's kind of hard to explain, but during the time we talked, I kept seeing, like, okay, I'm an 80s baby, and I'm sure many of you, your parents had the old, huge camcorder, so, you know, videotaping home tapes. That's what I was seeing, except instead of tapes from decades ago, this was from a month ago, and it kept showing me at the doomed men's graves. I kept hearing the men's whisper, "Come back here." My mind, which was free from everything at that point, kept going back there. We realized it was one of these men, the bandits, the Cochise County Cowboys. So, who was it? Before I leave, I show my friend pictures of the headstones. There's one with all their names, and her face loses all color. She looks to be in a trance. I get nervous and I ask her what's going on, what's wrong, and she replies to me, "Look at this picture, at the names," and I do so. She then tells me to look at the piece of paper she used to write on during the session. The word judge stares back at me along with a couple of other things. I look at her, not understanding what she's trying to get at. She explains to me that whenever she is writing or drawing, she uses her non-dominant hand, the left, to pick up a color. She had a tin full of colored pencils and markers, crayons and paints and what have you. She admits to me that she always avoids the color red due to the fact that, to her, it refers to blood, gore, etc. During our session, she was guided by the spirit to use red. In fact, since it's never used, she had to search for it. Then, when she saw the headstone with one of the names being Red Sample, she just knew it was him. You know, to some, it may sound weird and bizarre, but maybe it's one of those things that you just had to experience for yourself. And I hope you never experience something like this. The attachment, it was more than just being sick and feeling achy, not being able to breathe. I mentioned the strangulation feeling, but it's worth mentioning again as it was very severe. It was intense and something that I've never experienced before, and I hope I never experience it again. This man was legally hanged for crimes that he committed. It's like he was trying to make me feel what he went through. And boy, did he. And boy, did I. There were also times where I would be alone, but feel like someone was there. Not only that, but I could hear a man breathing. It was so spooky. So that's my story. Thank you, Fitz and Lil, for letting me be on your phenomenal podcast. Have a spectacular season.
Thank you so much, Tessa, and thank you for the history as well. We know we love that stuff, and we love Paranormal Prowlers, and that was a really interesting one.
Yeah, Boot Hill's somewhere that I really want to investigate. And I don't know if anybody's aware of it, but there is this famous photograph of somebody that went to Boot Hill Cemetery and was taking photos, and there's this sort of head and shoulders of a cowboy poking out of the grass behind him.
Oh, is that the location of that? I know the photograph you mean, and I didn't put two and two together.
Yeah, It's a really interesting photograph. I'd love to go and investigate. It's such a fascinating place, but there's so many places like that over there. But yeah, would love to.
But not if it's that hot. Tessa mentioned the temperature, and obviously we had to convert it because we didn't really know what that meant in terms of Celsius, but that is really, I don't think I've ever experienced temperatures that high.
I think I have, but I'm really not. I'm built for cold weather.
Well, I'm cold all the time, but I can't handle that kind of heat. Absolutely. I mean, I think last summer we got to nearing those temperatures and I was useless. I couldn't do anything. So I can only imagine how, uncomfortable and irritating that must. I wouldn't have been able to do anything.
I would have, if I was able to function, I would have been quite irritable.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked on the show before about the dangers of investigating when you're vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And the inclination is to think of being vulnerable as being sick or depressed or anxious, but in actual fact, this is exactly one of those cases. Feeling unwell, being, at risk of heat stroke, to be honest, that is just as vulnerable because you're not yourself. You're not going to be performing at 100%.
It's another thing that's potentially getting under your skin.
Yeah.
And just, like you say, not being yourself, not having that sort of self-confidence.
And I'm really grateful for Tessa for sharing this because it's quite a difficult thing as an investigator to stand up and say, this wasn't me, but I did this thing, I called them out, I antagonized the spirits, whatever. It's not something any of us really want to do, but we are human at the end of the day. And we have bad days, we're suffering, we're not feeling ourselves. And I can understand why you would, you've gone on this trip, you're there, you're at this incredible location. Of course, you're going to want to carry on and investigate no matter what. And it's something you've really got to think about as an investigator, especially because, when we investigate, the times are few and far between. They're really special. They're things that you really look forward to. When you get into a location, it's a big event. And the last thing you want to do is pass that up because you're not feeling yourself. But it is something that you really need to consider quite seriously because, as Tessa tells us, that can have some serious consequences.
Well, the other thing that sprang to mind for me was, if you think about the sort of tail end of her story, I'm wondering whether, as we were saying, she wasn't herself, whether that was literally the case. Because these people were hanged. Presumably they weren't particularly happy about that fact, and they would have been sort of angry, irritable. I dare say that's quite a hot state. So it probably would have been, if not that hot, but at least sort of hottish. So, she's feeling the sort of things they may have felt, and whether she was picking up on their feelings, and that's why she was more irritable. And
that's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, I was saying not really herself in terms of ill health, but she could have been being affected by something that was particularly strong in that area. And that happens on a lot of investigations. We know a lot of people that's happened to. We actually had sort of a very minor experience with that in our old house. I know I had times, and I think looking back on it now, that our other housemates were affected and influenced to maybe, display behaviour that wasn't really just down to them.
Yeah.
I think that's very possible.
You hear it quite a lot. And there's been a few books I've read, there's stories I've heard about, and there's other investigators that we've talked to or seen. And it's very much, they weren't themselves. They're behaving very strangely. And it's a common thing. So, I'm wondering if that is potentially what happened here. You say you weren't yourself, and that was what was happening. It literally wasn't you.
So that's something to really bear in mind for teams of investigators. And I know that Haunted Antiques, when we've spoken to them before, they've had experiences where they've had to pull team members out of investigations because they've noticed that one of their team members is acting strangely or not really themselves. And I think it's something that as a team, you need to be really aware of your team members. And if they are getting cross when it's not, that doesn't really fit their personality, maybe it's just, pull them out.
Yeah, if your team's acting out of character, then, take a break, sit down, have a breather, get some fresh air.
And just sort of sit and think about it. Is this coming from me, or is this potentially a dangerous situation?
Interesting. So thank you again to Tessa, and don't forget, Tessa is from the Paranormal Prowlers podcast, and of course we'll be putting links on the website in the show notes to the Paranormal Prowlers show, along with all the other shows that we feature on today's episode.
Well, it's time now for another listener story, and this one's from Kaylee, who wrote to us previously about the activity that she'd experienced whilst growing up and how teaspoons would always go missing at her mother's house.
I've been living with my now fiancé for 5 years, and activity's been starting to amplify in our apartment, much to his horror. We live in a new-ish apartment building, which is very small and secure. Unless you have a key, you can't get into the site, and we're on the second floor, so it's impossible to break into. Our apartment is very small and an open floor plan, so the kitchen and living space are the same room, with 2 bedrooms off this space. Out of a pack of 20 bought mid last year, all but 2 teaspoons have disappeared. As teaspoons have always disappeared since I was a kid, and I got into so much trouble over it growing up, I purposefully do not use them, mainly to make the point that it's not me. My partner continued to blame me for it until 2 of his watches and a pair of specially made cufflinks I got him for our anniversary disappeared. It gets a bit convoluted here, sorry. My partner is a police officer and is meticulous about his clothes, boots and accessories. Everything has a place, will be put back neatly in order and straight away as soon as he comes home from work. He has a box which contains all of his watches, there are about 10 of them, and his cufflinks. This box sits on the chest of drawers which is right next to our bed. Around November last year, Dave told me he had this extremely vivid and horrible dream that something was trying to drag him out of our bedroom door. He said he couldn't see what was attacking him, and he was trying to wake me up, screaming at me to help him as he could see me still asleep in bed. He was so spooked and convinced it really happened that he barely slept for the rest of the week. He's been a police officer for over 20 years, and he's dealt with some horrible situations, so he isn't scared easily. He also isn't one that is ready to admit he believes in the paranormal, except for the one positive experience he had with his late great-grandmother. A story for another time, but he is also very fearful of the paranormal. Closer towards Christmas, it was late at night. I'd already gone to bed, and Dave was up playing FIFA and noticed our cat acting strange. He was making this weird yowling noise, similar to the noise he makes if he's going to be sick, but it had more of a growl to it, and was moving his head around as if following something. Dave got a bit spooked and came to bed. He stayed up on his iPad, but saw, and these were the words he used to describe it, a fuzzy goldfish ping-pong ball-like thing moving around the living space which our bedroom looks into. Our cat chased it, which worried him, so he quickly grabbed him, came back to bed and shut the bedroom door. Dave didn't say anything again about it until a couple of weeks later, when he asked me if I'd seen anything odd around the apartment when I was at home. Sometimes I do feel like I'm being watched whilst at home, and I've had the occasional odd dream where there's something been reflected in the wardrobe door mirror which faces our bed, watching me sleep. But I've put it down to, a bad dream, or if there's something there, I'll say hello in acknowledgement, but leave it at that, as nothing had come any further than that. This sounds weird, but unless I see the dog that I had as a child and was extremely close with, I only see her when something bad is going to happen or when I'm really unwell, I'm generally not that concerned. Anyway, continuing on with Dave, he told me that he woke up randomly and saw the fuzzy gold ping pong ball thing again in our room, hovering over my side of the bed and the chest of drawers. He went back to sleep thinking he was just seeing things, but the next morning, 2 of his watches, which had special meaning to him, and the cufflinks I'd bought him for our anniversary, were gone. As I mentioned previously, our apartment is impossible to get into, only we have keys. If someone broke in, you'd think they'd take all the watches or other jewellery we have, as well as the iPad or laptop. It's extremely odd. Since then, we've heard footsteps outside of our bedroom, walking around the small space that's our living room, into the kitchen and back to the door of our bedroom. More teaspoons have gone missing, as well as a pair of earrings that Dave bought me. Our cat occasionally will meow at something during the middle of the night, and I've seen him appear to be watching someone moving around during the day. Have you guys ever experienced a thieving ghost? I've tried asking nicely for our things back, but to no avail. If you have any ideas, I'm willing to give it a go.
Thank you, Kaylee, for sharing that with us. And in answer to your question, yes, we have. We have experienced a thieving ghost. In fact, right at the beginning, near the time when we started this podcast, when we first started having activity happen in the house, we had things go missing. One of my favourite knives went missing. My car keys went missing. There were other stuff as well. There was also things that appeared out of nowhere that we don't know where they came from. And I did the same as you. I just sort of stood there and went, please give me my whatever it was back. They did turn up eventually, but I don't know what it was. Unfortunately, I can't give you any further advice. I don't know if they just decided to give them back or... I mean, in terms of my car keys, they came back pretty quickly, but it was very strange because I was trying to leave the house. We were searching high and low. And then we literally heard the car keys drop out of midair in the middle of the room, and it hit the laminate floor. And they just came out of nowhere. I think Fitz was one side of the living room. I was the other side of the living room. We were both looking for them. We heard the sound of the keys hitting the floor, and they were in the middle of the floor. Yeah,
it was so strange.
It was really, there was nowhere for them to fall out of. It was just the weirdest thing.
It was. There was quite a few things in your story, actually, that were familiar. The sort of fuzzy ping pong ball thing. The one I saw was black, but it sounds very similar to what you're saying.
And our cat chased it.
Our cat does tend to sit at the bottom of the stairs at night and talk to the ghost at the top of the stairs.
I was just going to mention that myself. It's so funny. It's this little habit she has. After dinner, she goes to the bottom of the stairs. She looks up, like you can really see that she's focusing on something at the top of the stairs, and she just starts chattering away. And we just joke that it's time for her to go and talk to the ghost at the top of the stairs. But we honestly, we don't know what she's doing. There is nothing up there.
No, it is very strange. With the items, we have teaspoons that go missing.
Yep.
And forks. For some reason, our forks tend to go missing.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it is that ghosts have about cutlery, but yeah, they do seem to like it. And my mum had a similar issue with items disappearing, but hers tended to just reappear randomly. I think she had some earrings that went missing, and they just randomly appeared one morning on the sofa cushion.
This is it. I think everything that we've lost has reappeared in a completely different place to where we put it or where we would expect it to be. Both cases that I remember specifically, the car keys and my knife, they appeared in the middle of the floor where, you know, we had walked for days and days and days, and there's no way we could have possibly missed them being there if they had been there previously.
Yeah, and it also reminds me a little bit of Keith, who we interviewed in episode, was it 5?
Keith Linder, yes.
Linder. And he had items that just disappeared and they never came back. They'd just gone.
And also things that appeared.
Yeah, but weren't necessarily the things that were missing. Just random stuff would appear.
Stuff that he'd never seen before.
I'd love to offer you some advice.
No, I'm afraid we don't have any.
Yeah, we've tried asking, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't. But as to whether they were paying attention to us or that it was just going to come back anyway, I don't know.
No, all we can offer is our understanding.
Yeah, we can empathise and commiserate with you, and maybe one of our other listeners has got some ideas. So
yes, if you do, if anybody else out there has had the same issue and you've had success with something, please do get in touch and we'll pass that along. Thank you again to Kaylee for sharing that story with us. And you may have noticed that this story featured strange dreams and nightmares coinciding with an increase in paranormal activity. And this definitely becomes a bit of a theme running through this episode, and you'll notice as we continue. But first, something a little bit different. I know we usually stay firmly in the realm of ghosts, but you guys have been asking us for recommendations of our favourite podcasts. And it just so happens that Fitz's interest in the paranormal extends to the unexplained happenings in the sky.
It certainly does, and these next two stories come from the hosts of the Holosky podcast, Steve and Kyle, and their podcast doesn't just focus on UFOs and aliens and things, though that is a particular interest of mine. I find it fascinating. They also cover sort of cryptids and ghosts and other spooky stuff, so it is something that you may well enjoy. So have a listen to their personal experiences, and as usual, I'll put the links in the show notes so you can check them out.
Hi, everyone. This is Steven from the Holosky podcast, and I'm here to share a story with you. It doesn't necessarily involve me personally, but I was kind of involved in the outskirts of it. So, that being said, this happened when I was younger, living in my parents' house. It was me, my mom and dad, my little brother and sister. My dad was an over-the-road trucker, so he was gone quite a bit. So most of the time it was just my mother and me and my two younger siblings. So one night, my mom gets us all ready for bed, and she turns in for the night. She has what she thinks is a dream, right? So in this dream, she wakes up and she sees all of these bright lights shining into the windows of our house. Like it's almost as if someone had pulled a car into our front yard and were just shining their high beams directly into the window of the house. This kind of terrifies her. So she gets up to check on all of us kids. I'm in my bedroom. My younger sister's in her bedroom. She goes to check on my youngest brother, and he's not in his bed. This kind of terrifies her. So she starts looking around the house, and as she gets to our laundry room, our pantry, which has a door that opens to the backyard, she sees my little brother Dylan, and he is opening the door to go into the backyard. As he opens it, there's this huge beam of light that comes in, and he goes to step out, and she wakes up. So naturally, she's terrified. She wakes up and she thinks it's a dream. As she wakes up from this dream, she looks to the foot of her bed, and there is a small figure standing at the foot of her bed. And as she kind of makes eye contact with it, I guess, it notices that she's awake and it sprints out of her room. At that point, she wakes up again, almost as if she thought it was a dream within a dream. So as she wakes up again, she's kind of freaked out. She gets up, checks on all of us. We're all fine. Everybody's in their beds and everything. She goes back to sleep. So she wakes up the next day, and her and our neighbor, there's kind of a kitty corner across our backyard, they were out talking. They go for walks and they talk to each other while they hang clothes on the laundry or on the laundry line and everything like that. So as they're talking, our neighbor's like, "What did you have going on last night?" And my mom's like, "Nothing. Why do you ask?" And she says, about 2:30, 3 o'clock, me and my husband got in a little argument. So I slept in the boys' room, which their window faces your house. She says at about 2:30 to 3, the whole bedroom lit up. Like you guys were having some kind of huge party over there. She's like, "I don't know what was going on, but it was crazy." So that's pretty much where it ends. Kind of weird, kind of a odd coincidence. But there are some other things that happened in the house. I live in this house now that kind of go hand in hand with this experience. But if you guys want to know it, hop on over to the Holosky podcast and check us out. You can find us on all major podcatchers, so stay weird.
Hey guys, this is Kyle from the Holosky podcast, and my creepy story is kind of on the lines of what Steve submitted, but there was an experience where I had my girlfriend staying with me, who's now my wife, but at the time, she was just my girlfriend, and at about, 2 o'clock in the morning or so, she wakes me up and says, "Kyle, I think there's somebody outside." And I'm like, "What do you mean you think there's somebody outside? Why do you think that?" She said, "Because there's lights that keep coming in the window." And so I get up, I go looking out the window. I don't see anything out there at all. But I notice off in the distance that there is a bright orange ball in the middle of the all black sky. And it definitely wasn't the moon, because I could visibly see that the object was moving from left to right in my field of view, therefore ruling out it being the moon. And she decided to press me on what it could be, because she got up to look at it as well. And I gave her some half excuse, saying that it was probably from a bonfire lighting onto a cloud or something. And she started to rationalize that. And I'm like, "You know what? We're not going to talk about this tonight. We're going to go to sleep." So that's what we ended up doing. And we talked about it further in the morning. But the weird thing, aside from the experience itself, is that I can remember when I was a kid, I would probably been in my teens, and I used to have dreams about lights coming in the very same window and looking for me. I never had an experience where I actually woke up and saw things out the window, but I remember lights coming through the window in some of my dreams. So there's a little bit of correlation there. But that pretty much sums up my personal experience. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Have a good one. Stay weird.
And thank you to Stephen and Kyle for sharing those stories. I do really enjoy the Holosky podcast, so I do recommend that you check it out. And I think out of those two, it's like Steve's story really gave me the chills with the figure at the end of his mum's bed scuttering away.
I was going to bring that up as well, because I literally ducked behind my hands when he was describing just waking up and seeing that figure at the end of the bed, because I've had a sort of similar experience with something just looking at me in bed, and it is terrifying. But also that kind of Jacob's ladder effect of waking up and seeing something and then waking up again. But my question is, did she wake up again? Or was it like a trick so that whatever had been standing there looking at her was trying to make her think that it didn't happen?
Or is it sort of like the Men in Black thing where it's like, oh, she's come down and picked up the boy from going outside the door. Boom, let's wipe her memory and put her back to sleep. And then she's gone back to bed and it's like, oh, not again. Click. No, wipe her memory and go back to sleep.
Well, the thing is, obviously there was something going on because the neighbour saw something happening in the house.
It's weird.
It's a really spooky one. The thing is, I don't have a particular interest in UFOs, I've got to say. You know, it's mainly fits when historically in the past, when somebody's mentioned UFOs, I've been like, you know, I'm not that interested. But the thing is, when I actually sit down and hear the stories, I get really gripped by them because they are so weird and fascinating, and I just can't help getting really into them.
I find it strange because horror movies aren't my jam. Like horror ghost, like fictional ghost stories and stuff, not interested. Boring. Like, I like the real stuff. I love hearing about people's personal stories.
You're not into horror movies at all, are you?
I just get so bored. But when I was a kid, and like even now, like I love sci-fi and alien stuff. And I remember there was quite a few films, even sort of 50s, 60s films. So they're not exactly terrifying by today's standards. But I remember being like hiding under the duvet after watching the sort of UFO and alien films when I just wouldn't have the same effect with horror.
I think as I've learned more and sort of listened to more what are classed on the surface as UFO stories, the question that keeps coming up to me is, why are we putting these in pigeonholes? Why are we saying one's a ghost story, one's a paranormal experience, and one's a UFO story? Because actually, when you break down a lot of these stories, we're not talking about little green men a lot of the times. We're talking about strange lights, strange figures, mysterious happenings, noises in the middle of the night, and all that to me speaks more of just a paranormal. I say just, that's the wrong word. There's nothing just about it, but it's very much a paranormal experience. If you told me that story and didn't put a UFO sort of label on it, I wouldn't necessarily think of it anything more than an unexplained experience.
The amusing thing that happened in my head as you were saying that was like imagining a ghost hunter that's, you know, oh, there's some paranormal stuff that's been happening in the house and they're going around with their meters and recording stuff. And then they turn around and there's an alien poking its head around the corner. Like, oh, well, it's an alien. I better go home. It's not going to be a ghost. It's not very interesting at all, is it? It's like, no, I'm sure they would be like, oh, wow, this is fascinating. Let's continue to investigate. But yeah, I just had that mental image when you were like, yeah, we pigeonhole these things.
We do, though. And we don't work together enough because you've got like ghost hunters, you've got UFO hunters, you've got, you know, cryptid hunters. But actually, when you look at a lot of the stories and the evidence and the experiences people have had, there's massive crossovers, huge crossovers that just kind of fall down a black hole, and we don't really look deeper into why there's crossovers and what's going on there.
Yeah, I find it all fascinating. But yeah, I must admit, even considering what we do, I do like the UFO and alien stuff as well. It's a bit of a thing for me. So yeah, check out Holosky. Like I say, they're not just focused on aliens and UFOs. They do sort of ghosts and spooky things and cryptids and other stuff like that. So do check them out. I'm sure you'll enjoy them. And I'll put links in the show notes.
Now, as we mentioned, we don't very often mention UFOs at all. And so we don't often receive listener experiences on the topic. But it just so happens that one listener has shared such a story with us. And what better time to tell it, we thought, than now. So ghost fanatics, don't worry, stay tuned. We've got lots more ghosts coming up for you yet. But for those of you whose ears pricked up at the mention of the mysteries of the skies, this story may just pique your interest. And this is from Andrew.
This is a story I've told no one. I live about 30 miles southwest of Phoenix. Beyond to the south and west, there's only desert and very dark night skies. Being an airplane enthusiast over the years, this is an amazing place to be, with commercial planes coming in and out of Sky Harbor Airport and military planes from Luke Air Force Base. From F-16s to F-22s to the F-35, I've seen them all, many times of day and night. It's very relaxing at night to watch the commercial traffic flow flying over as they line up for landing, or waiting for the planes that have taken off to turn off their front lights as they finish their takeoff checklist and gain altitude. All this is to say, I know what I'm looking at. I've never seen anything strange in the night sky. Arizona is known for many UFO sightings, but in 15 years of watching the night sky, I haven't seen anything that I couldn't identify. Again, this far out, there's nothing but desert to the south and west. I have nights that I have trouble sleeping, and on those nights I'll get up and go out on our large backyard deck, which runs from one side of the house to the other, north and south, and pace back and forth while watching the night sky. We've become quite good friends. On this night, I wandered out of the house at 2 a.m. Most of the air traffic stops around 10:30 p.m, and there was only silence and the bright stars that I have come to know so well. As I paced to the north and past the corner of the house, I stopped to look at the Big Dipper and saw something that I couldn't process for a moment. There was a gold circle about a quarter of the size of the moon in the upper atmosphere. The circle was illuminated from the inside. I remember thinking that the colour was beautiful. I did know that nothing like that should have been in that area. Even the moon doesn't touch the northern sky. Upon seeing the gold circle, I did what most people would do. I looked down and closed my eyes, and then looked again. It was still there, but it was changing as I looked up. As I watched, it got larger, irising up like an aperture. Needless to say, I didn't look away again. It reached about 3/4 of the size of the moon. It stayed that way for a few seconds, then reversed and got smaller and smaller, and then disappeared to a pinpoint, and then gone. As I continued to watch, a small object came from the spot the circle had disappeared. We've all seen satellites making their way across the sky, and this was exactly the same. I watched the object move to the south for 45 seconds, and then disappear. I've done some research on the subject, and found a few stories with people having similar sightings. Interestingly, the portals were all different shapes and colours. I couldn't find any gold circle portals. I wasn't scared of what I saw. Like I said, the circle was beautiful. It radiated a peaceful light. Really, I feel that I was very lucky to have been given the opportunity to see such a rare event. Did I see a portal and ship from another time and space arriving in our reality? Seems so.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing that with us. And for all my saying, oh, I'm not that interested in aliens. But the thing is, I have actually had a couple of very strange experiences that I can't explain. The first one, well, this story that Andrew's told us reminded me, and it's just sort of brought it all back to my mind. This is before I met Fitz. I was only a teenager, and I was walking from one town to another close by town. And at the time, I was younger. It wasn't such a built-up area. I was walking along a road, but either side of the road was just pitch dark fields. It was farmland, so there wasn't a lot of light pollution. And I looked up, and I saw a star, and I just thought it was a bright star. And then all of a sudden, it zipped to one side. I mean, really fast. I don't mean like a plane. I mean, it zipped. But weirder than that, it then zipped back the opposite direction, and it just went zip, zip, far too fast to be any kind of a commercial aircraft or anything like that. And obviously I was like, taken aback and staring at it. This is before camera phones and video phones and things like that. I didn't have anything to record it on, unfortunately. And then it got bigger and bigger, just like Andrew describes it. It got bigger, larger. It was just a circular blob of light, really, but it increased in size quite slowly. And then really, really quickly, it kind of collapsed in on itself. It's got bigger and bigger, and then went whoop, and just disappeared. It got really quickly smaller and just disappeared into itself, and then nothing, just gone. It was very odd, and I have
strange.
No idea what it was. I could see it being some kind of natural phenomena if it hadn't been for the moving, but the fact that it just moved across the sky quite a significant distance, because it was very, very far away, and it went so quickly and then back in the opposite direction, and there's just nothing. There's nothing that can do that.
No, it's weird. No, there were so many things in that story that just sort of pinged home for me. Mostly the non-weird bits, just having an interest in aviation and sitting out on the deck at night and looking at the stars when you can't sleep very well. But yeah, I know I've had my own paranormal UFO type experience, and you've got another one to share as well.
Yeah.
But mine was weird. I mean, again, like Andrew was saying, I know my dad's a private pilot, and I've got friends with commercial and military pilots. I'm not saying I know everything, but I've got.
Well, you've flown planes, haven't you?
I've flown. I've got a reasonable idea of things like nav lights and the capabilities of aircraft. So it's not like I'm just like, anything that I see in the sky, it's a UFO. But I was sat at my desk, and this was at Coffee HQ, so it's got to be in the last sort of 8-10 years. And my computer desk sits next to the window. So when I'm sat there and the curtains are open, I can see straight outside. And I was sat there one night playing a computer game with some friends, and I see this ring of like 5, I can't remember if it's 5 or 6, but there was a ring of lights, red lights, and it was just spinning. Like your typical 50s
like a
saucer.
sci-fi effect.
Not that I could see a saucer or anything. I literally could just see the lights. It was dark. It was night. And it was just spinning. And it sort of travelling in a straight line, completely silent. It came just over the house opposite. I couldn't tell you exactly the height, but it was below the clouds, and it was quite low cloud that night. So we're talking maximum a sort of a couple of 100 feet, if that. And it just flew in a straight line over the house. And I jumped up out of my seat and I ran upstairs and went to look out of our bedroom window, which looks out the back of the house. And again, I could see it travelling in a straight line out across the rest of the town and off into the distance. And I don't know what it was. I don't know of anything that just spins like that for a start.
Off the top of my head, the only thing I can think of that it would have been is some kind of toy, or drone. But the thing is,
too big for that, and this was before drones were commonplace.
I was going to say, this was a while ago, wasn't it? The trouble, all of our experiences that we have had, because we have got another one, but they're all taking place sort of like you say 8 to 10 years ago, within the first few years of us living here, and that was well before drones. There were like flying toy aircraft, but not really, unless you were out to fake something. Nothing that you'd be operating at night.
This travelled, it was late at night. We're talking sort of at least 9, probably closer to 10 p.m. It was dark. It's not the sort of not the sort of time of day you'd be flying a remote control thing.
No.
And it was dead straight. It didn't seem to be affected at all by any kind of wind. Like planes, if you actually watch them, a lot of the time they'd sort of jump, and especially if you're in them, you can feel it. You sort of bounce a little bit and jostle. And this thing was rock solid, just in a straight line. Like nothing was affecting it whatsoever.
So weird. Do you remember what time of year it was, just out of interest?
I think it was September, October time. I think it was autumn. I can't be sure, but I seem to remember that it was cold.
I'm just thinking, not summer when people are more likely to be out at night time, just messing around.
No, it was weird. And it's kind of stuck. And I remember saying to the guys funnily enough, I used to play an online World War II flight sim, and all the guys I used to play with are ex-commercial or military pilots. The majority of them. And I said, I'm just seeing a UFO. I dropped my headset and sort of chased upstairs to have a look at it. But, these are the guys I was chatting with at the time. But, they couldn't recognize anything as sort of being something they were familiar with either. Weird. Never seen it again.
No, but we did see something else.
Yeah, and this one was quite strange. Like the other one, I was just a bit like, oh, that was cool. Like weird, but cool.
But this one I got really creeped out.
It was a bit spooky. And it was it wasn't as big or as clear or anything. It was just a sort of reddy-orange triangular light in the sky. And it was a little bit bigger than a sort of planet, like when you see the planets in the sky and they look a bit big for a star or a bit sort of specific colour. It was perhaps 3 or 4 times as big as you'd see Mars in the sky.
But the thing is, it started off quite near the horizon, which,
it moved too quickly for a planet.
It moved far too quickly and in not a way that a planet would move.
But when we say quickly, we're not talking like plane quickly.
No.
We're talking very slow, gentle movement.
The thing is, Fitz was actually at on my mum's land at the time, so he wasn't in the house. And he rang me from where he could see this because he was outside. And it had sort of started to rise just vertically upwards in the night sky. And by the time he rang me and I ran outside the front of our house to look at it, it had got quite a high, sort of midway, I would say. And it continued to rise gently. So we're talking about the course of maybe like 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So
and then it started moving off to one side, didn't it? Yeah,
this is it. And then it changed direction. And it was just this very weird triangular shaped red light that was very out of place. I mean, we're not talking about anywhere where there's like machinery or cranes or anything. There's nothing like that at all. Just houses and then the sky above. No tall buildings. We're like a village, so there's no high rise, nothing. And I don't know why it creeped me out so much, but I was really, really rattled. We did actually I tried to take some pictures of it. I think I've still got them somewhere. But the thing is, I was using just a handheld camera. We were taking the pictures at night, so it was dark. And then as anybody that tries to take pictures in the dark knows, you end up with a very long exposure.
Yeah.
And unless you've got the camera firmly on a tripod, which I didn't, all you can see is a light moving around. So the pictures came out, but it just looked like somebody was like painting across the sky with a red sparkler. But I think I must have them somewhere still. So it didn't really... You couldn't really tell any more from the photo.
But it did give you a creepy feeling. It was like you were being observed. But it's got to have been quite far away. Like it wasn't like it was sort of 20 yards away. We're talking it's probably at least a couple of miles away.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. But my overall memory of it is not so much the lights, but the feeling of being scared. And I didn't know why I was scared, but I was really freaked out by it. It upset me a lot. And there's no real reason for that feeling.
Yeah, it's odd. And considering the one I saw when I was at my computer flew directly over the house, so if anything was going to happen...
But you didn't find that particularly disturbing?
I was fascinated, but it didn't seem disturbing. But that, I remember, because I rang you because I was a bit uncomfortable seeing it. And that's why I said, am I going crazy? Or is there actually a thing in the sky?
It's like, no, I can see it. And I'm freaked out too. And it was just weird. And I just have no reason for why we felt so freaked out.
Yeah, it was strange.
Okay, we're going to wrap up the UFO stuff now. Ghost aficionados, do not worry. We've got more ghosties coming your way. Now, one of the podcasts we've been really enjoying recently is the Haunted Heart podcast. And we're really grateful that they've come on the show today to tell you about their personal paranormal experiences. Next up, this is Katie and Kenny from the Haunted Heart.
Hey guys, it's Kenny and Katie from the Haunted Heart podcast.
Hey.
Our friends Lil and Fitz invited us on to tell you guys some of our personal paranormal experiences.
Yes.
Very fun. We couldn't be happier to be here. So I'm going to go first because I'm bossy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that she is, folks.
I have been fairly open to the paranormal. We kind of have talked a little bit on our show about how, some people have more guards up against these sort of things. Kenny will talk a bit more about that. We call them blocks. I have been fairly open as far as vibes and things like that. And probably one of the most spooky places that I've ever been was actually when I was overseas visiting Scotland. visiting a dear friend of mine who lives in Ayrshire, actually. And we were touring the Edinburgh Vaults. Now, my friend, very much into the whole spooky, witchy aesthetic. And so we get along quite well. And we decided that we were going to go tour the Edinburgh Vaults. Actually, she decided that. So she knew that, and she was really excited the whole trip to take me to this one particular place. And I was like, well, it must be cool. So the Edinburgh Vaults, as I'm sure most of you guys listening to this know, were a place, they were supposed to be built under the bridge there in Edinburgh. It was supposed to be shops. And in fact, like a goldsmith moved in and a leather worker moved in and a shoe cobbler moved in. But pretty quickly, within a year after the shop's opening, it was basically deemed to be uninhabitable, basically, because the bridge wasn't waterproofed, unfortunately. So all of the water was coming in, and Edinburgh in those days had pretty serious plumbing problems. So other things other than water were also seeping in through the bridge. So as you can imagine, it was not a very lovely place to shop. So the shop owners moved out, and as the reputable businessmen moved out, the somewhat less reputable businessmen moved in, and that included the likes of drug dealers, body snatchers, bootleggers, and similar kind. So if you go to Edinburgh Vaults today, you'll descend down a bunch of really narrow steps into a place that is virtually soundless. And I say virtually soundless because there are lots of sounds. But as you kind of descend, there's the busy street of Edinburgh above. And when you descend, you kind of step into darkness and silence. It's very, very dimly lit. It's lit only by candles. Actually, I think they did have electric lights, but I think the tour that we were on just didn't decide to use them very much. And my friend, of course, was all excited to take me here. So you go down into the main antechamber, and the tour guide made a point of stopping and saying, like, do you hear that? And of course, there's nothing. And they're like, we're right under that bustling street, but you can't hear anything from the street above. And I realized that the point that she was trying to make there a little bit later in the tour was in other rooms, we would hear rocks sort of scuttling, right? But nobody was in that room. And the tour guide, I think, just wanted to make it clear that we weren't hearing anything from above, so that we were extra clear that when we heard those rocks being thrown across the room, it was actually just rocks being thrown across the room and not anything that was coming from above us. So that was kind of alarming. There was also just a vibe about it that, like, oftentimes in historical places, you'll kind of like feel the vibe of, you know, if you're in a place that has seen a lot of trauma, that sort of has an echo to it. So this was like that, but like so much worse. And as we sort of proceeded through the vaults, the feeling of dread and heaviness just got heavier and heavier and heavier. All the while we're hearing like footsteps in other rooms. And of course, we're all together in one room and the group moves as a unit. So as we go along, there's just an overall, you know, vibe of oppression. In one particular room, I was standing in the center of the room and I looked back behind. I heard like a rock or something, and I looked back behind us and I saw just like a shape moving. There's one particular room, which was one of the first rooms that we went in, where there was, I think that was where the smelter had worked originally. And the corners of that room had shadows that would move around, like independent of the candlelight, which was very alarming. That was not a room that I was interested in staying in very long. And the last room, what really did it for me was the very last room that we went into was a room that had been occupied by about 10 different families. And it was certainly not big enough to be occupied by 10 different families. But it was the last room that we were in on the tour. And in that room, I just had one of the strangest experiences I've ever had in my entire life. That feeling of dread and oppression that had kind of been increasing as we went throughout the tour, in that room kind of reached a breaking point. And I got really, really hot. My face got very flushed. If you've ever been in the vaults, it is not a hot place. It is very cold. But I was very hot. My pulse was like through the roof. And I was kind of freaking out. And my friend is like, oh. Like she doesn't want to say anything because she doesn't want to make a scene. And I don't really want to say anything because I don't want to make a scene, but I like basically had to go ahead and leave. And when we got above ground, the further that we moved away from the vaults, the easier it was to kind of calm down and like chill. So while I didn't necessarily see any full-bodied apparitions, it was certainly an experience to remember. It was a fun time, but it was also not a fun time. Unlike Mary King's Cross, which is a great place to go, and it was very fun. We saw a couple full-bodied apparitions. I looked back in Mary King's Cross, which is just across the street. I looked back to a room and I saw a man in a yellow coat like walk across the door frame. And that room had been occupied by a merchant who just like sold his wares and things. But it wasn't bad vibes. That was good. That was good vibes.
Just doing his thing.
Just doing his thing. And I think Kenny is going to tell us some stories of some perhaps more recent entities, if you will.
Well, I don't know how recent I would say, because I'm old and ancient now at the ripe old age of 31. But mine happened when I was younger. Like Katie mentioned, she's more open to a lot of things than I am. And I don't oftentimes feel as sensitively as she might or others might.
Doesn't catch the vibe check.
Yes. So growing up, my mother was a single mom, and like I would often have to go to work with her. So when I was younger, I was maybe 5 years old. She worked at this place that was an army surplus store in our downtown home. And it was kind of like this it's a really old building, as lots of the buildings are. And so it just had a lot of history to it. And it had a lot of, I think when places that kind of like store energy tend to vibrate more the longer that they're here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used to go to work with her, and it was they kind of sold like military equipment. So they would sell uniforms or even rations.
Yeah. So military surplus store.
Yeah. Just different things like that. We could make dog tags and whatnot.
America's all about it. We love the military.
Yes. So I would often go to work with her, and in the mornings you would walk in, she would open the store. It would just be me and her for most of the time, all day. And we would walk in, and you would just feel this immediate, like this ominous feeling around. And there were plenty of times where we would walk in, and when we would walk in, shadows, these like black figures would disperse throughout. It would be one, sometimes it would be multiple, but you would often find that when you walk in, they just kind of went away. Not necessarily malicious, but definitely creepy, and definitely didn't want to be seen or be around, is kind of what we were feeling. There were 3 levels to the place. And so the first level was like the main shop area, and it had the office with the register. And we would often, to sort of bide time, play hide and seek or do whatever. We would just play games just to pass the time, because it wasn't a really busy place. And they had the little mirrors in the corners for shoplifters, the little dome mirrors. And so when we would be just around the store, you would often see those same figures in the mirrors. And if you caught them in the mirror, they would, again, disperse. It's very much like they didn't want to be seen, but that they were around.
Right.
Which was really weird. And you kind of always felt that weird presence. I remember it still, even today, some of the feelings that I would get when I would be there with her. And on the left side of the store, there was this big sliding door entrance that led to like a stock area. And I remember not seeing anything there, but there was just really heavy energy. Really heavy, just really bad. There was it was a really long hallway with shelves that was just stocked with junk at that point. And there was a room all the way down at the very end. And I remember going into that space and then just looking down and seeing this dark room, and then just feeling that like something was there. Something was in that darkness, and it was a little more malicious on that side. It felt like I wanted to go further into this darkness, like it was almost calling me to go in, but I was too afraid to do so. So I often steer cleared of that dark room that was at the end of that hallway. And then on the second floor of this building, there are a set of stairs right across from the office, and you could look up the stairs and see the door that led to this sort of like warehouse area that was on the top. And I would often go up there, but this particular door, it would not want to be closed. And I nowadays think that like, okay, it might be just an old door with a hinge, but there were several instances where we would go, it had a lock, we would lock it, come back down. My mother might go up there to get something, come back down, she would lock it, and then be in the office and then look up, and then the door's open. And that happened several times. Even once when I was playing on the stairs with a slinky and the door was shut, and I'm playing with my slinky on the stairs, and then look back, and then it's all of a sudden open. So you could hear footsteps up above on that landing. If you were on the main floor, you could hear what sounds like people walking, but it wasn't like a public area that was easily accessible. And so you would hear those things, and there would be times that I would be up there because I was a very curious child growing up. And in this warehouse area, there was a corridor that you could go into. And once you stepped in, there was, again, same situation as the first floor. There was a dark room. There was a door, and it was boarded up, and it had a singular hole cut out in the middle. And I remember going up there and staring down that corridor and seeing a face stare back at me from inside of that door. And there was a third level that was up there, and these corridors all had rooms because this was an old prison, is what we could guess, because there were tiny rooms and there were tiny toilets and stuff like that was very reminiscent of something that might be a prison. And even on the third floor where there was storage, there were jail cells and metal bars that had there were like student desks in there that had been stored for some reason, which was also an added layer of creepy. Like, why are these children's school desks just stored in this cell?
We're just keeping them here,
So yeah, a lot of our history.
Seems like a good place.
Yeah. A lot of the buildings in our downtown home have a lot of war history behind them, which is in itself very tragic, very heavy. And I could never confirm anything, but I do believe that this was a place that was potentially some sort of prison or holding area, and that a lot of souls had passed through this area and left some sort of negative energy. And this was experienced by both myself and my mother. And after that point, throughout the years, I sort of just developed my own personal block, because I think that I was just done at that point. I was a little it's very reminiscent of Danny Torrance from The Shining.
Mm.
Like, it was very much like I was this kid. I even at one point had a tricycle that I would ride up and down the aisles of the store.
Iconic.
I actually did. And at one point I ran into the back of a customer, and the customer was very angry with me. So that's a little bit of my history. And at that point, I just I feel like I personally developed just a block so that I just try not to experience these things. And I haven't really had much sensitivity to those sort of things since then. But that's not to say that I won't ever be in a situation where something might be able to break that down. So that's always interesting to think about, and is something that's always in the back of my mind.
Well, hopefully we did a good job with our spooky stories. And if you want to hear more from us, you can find us on line at thehauntedheart.com. We're also probably on whatever podcast platform you are using to listen to Knock Once for Yes. We're at The Haunted Heart Podcast on Instagram and at The Haunted Heart on Twitter. We would love it if you guys would come check us out. We're always looking to grow the Haunted Heart fam. So hopefully we will. But until then,
Stay spooky.
Thank you so much to Katie and Kenny for sharing their personal stories with us. I love, love, love the Haunted Heart podcast. Do go and check it out. There's so much to talk about here.
Yeah. The first thing was hilarious because on Katie's story, it's like, went to Edinburgh Vaults, and I'm really jealous because I want to go there.
Me too.
But it's just like, paranormal story, very good, very interesting. And then at the end, it's like, yeah, and we saw a full body apparition afterwards. And
just as a throwaway comment.
It's just like the throwaway of that. It's like a great story, but it was just the kind of like, yeah, and then we saw a full body apparition. But anyway.
But nothing to write home about. To be fair, though, touring that area of Edinburgh and Scotland in general, that's fairly standard. We saw a ghost here, we saw a ghost there. I mean, there's so many incredible haunted locations to check out. Scotland is chock full of history and ghosts. And I mean, it was, before everything happened, kind of the next place we wanted to go to. And we were sort of in the process of maybe planning a trip for a year or so. And yeah, of course, everything got turned on its head, but it's definitely well up there. We're very, very jealous, Katie, especially with the Edinburgh Vaults in particular. I mean, I think somebody asked us on another show recently where we wanted to go, and that was what we said. Edinburgh Vaults, they're just amazing. I really know what you mean, though, about the vibe of the place, and also what they were both talking about in terms of being open to experiences.
Yeah.
So it made me wonder, it made me think, because when we moved into this house, we didn't have anything happening. We've always talked about how strange it is that when we first moved into our house, there was no paranormal activity, nothing happened. And then when we started doing the show, or shortly after when we started doing the show, things started happening. And now it's making me wonder, listening to Katie and Kenny talking about Kenny in particular talking about how he grew up with all these experiences, and he just blocked himself off from it because he had to deal with that almost on a daily basis, and it just became too much to deal with. And he just didn't want anything to do with it anymore. He kind of needed a break from it. And looking at our history, having come from a really haunted house that was so bad we left, we had to leave, we moved out. When we moved in here, we didn't want there to be anything here. I almost wonder whether we had shut ourselves down and we were just like, nope, don't want to live with that, don't want our new house to be full of ghosts, don't want to deal with that anymore. And then it was only sort of in the later years when we started relaxing a bit and getting more interested in the subject again and opening ourselves back up to it that we then started to experience things.
Yeah, I don't know, because I think if that had been the case, we probably would have stopped it at our old house because that was the spooky house.
Yeah, but you see, we knew things were happening there. It was undeniable. I think we were beyond the point where we could block it out because we'd already let it in, if that makes sense. Whereas here, it was a fresh slate. It was a clean start. As far as we were concerned, there could be, it was possible that there was nothing here. We kind of went into it from a different perspective.
But then we moved in at my mum's for a bit to save up some money to move house, and you had experiences with Jack there.
Yeah, but I suppose that was so much more of a comforting thing.
So had you just blocked yourself off to anything negative?
I don't know.
But then here it's been quite positive anyway. So if it was positive, then surely that would have just carried on.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting concept because I do believe that some people are more open to experiences.
Yeah. And we've said
and
it
that
before,
you can make yourself more open to experiences.
Like some people, even witnessing the same thing, they both have an experience, but they have slightly different experiences of the experience.
Experiences of the experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll have it in different ways.
It's very interesting. But yeah, Kenny's story I loved because it was just like this really good spooky tale happened, and then this really good spooky tale happened, and then this, and he just kept escalating and escalating. And then when he got to the bit with the thing upstairs with the hole in the blocked off door, and
that was where I hid behind my hands. The face in the door. Oh my goodness.
For so much of it, I was just like, been there. I know how you feel. Yeah, been there. And then when he got to that bit, I was just like, oh.
And well, that building sounds like it's got some serious stories to tell.
Yeah, I want to go there.
Yeah, the bits about the furniture that got stashed away, and the bits that look like prison cells, and sounds like layer upon layer of history. And yeah, I'd love to delve into what's actually
We're both rather
there.
fond of an army surplus shop as well. So yeah, definitely perfect place. So Kenny, I'll be hitting you up for the address. And when things get a little bit easier travel wise, we'll have to go and see if they'll let us investigate
when we get back out into America again. That would be great.
Yeah, fantastic. But that was Katie and Kenny of the Haunted Heart podcast. We will put links in the show notes so that you can go and have a listen, and we do recommend that you do. And now it is time for our last listener story of the episode, and this one is from Serena.
I've had an attraction to all things dark and strange from a young age. I've always had nightmares for as long as I can remember, and I'm a lucid dreamer, which makes them more terrifying. At 28, I now cope with them much better, and can turn the dream or interact as I see fit. The first nightmare I clearly remember involved 3 horses standing at a fence, all bleeding from their eyes and noses, but very calmly. I was 5 or 6 at the time. There are definitely a few standouts over the years, with most of them normally graphic and gory. My parents don't believe in therapy or anything like it, so on bad nights they usually let me freak out, then calm down and go back to sleep. Maybe once a month or so I'd beg to sleep on their bedroom floor if it was really, really bad. One night, I was lying at the foot of the hope chest at the end of their bed, cocooned in blankets. My feet got cold, so I always fold the blanket over. This night, I just couldn't drift off back to sleep. I was fully awake and on edge. I was somewhere around 10 or 12 at the time, old enough to get more freaked out just from how freaked out I was. As I lay there trying to breathe and calm down, face pressed into the pillow, I felt the blanket over my toes get very slowly tugged off. It completely froze me with fear. Trying to be logical, I told myself it only felt like there was a draft, and the blankets had moved because my feet were so cold. I feigned half asleep, fumbling, just in case I didn't want to appear awake, and got the blanket securely over my toes again. Within seconds, it was being slowly peeled away again, from the right corner to the left. I felt the air on my toes and ankles, and stared ahead into the darkness. This game continued for close to an hour. My feet would be exposed, I would wait a minute before readjusting and tucking them back in tight, and it would start over again. I didn't dare look down at the end of my blanket for fear that I would see something grinning back. The whole experience had the feeling of being toyed with, but not necessarily playfully or without malice. I didn't call out for my parents or jump up to turn on the light. Eventually, whatever was messing with me must have grown bored, because the peeling back of the blanket stopped. Over the years, I would tell friends about the nightmares, mention to my parents and siblings when I thought I saw someone in the house, and lie awake at night convincing myself that I just had an overactive imagination. But I've never, ever told anyone about this experience. It was just too real. And although I've tried to logic myself out of it over and over, I think I'll always believe that something paranormal was messing with me that night and enjoying it immensely. Here's a hint for any listeners who struggle with fear. It helped me deal with the nightmares and anxiety. Don't believe for a second that you aren't as scary as the things that go bump in the night. If you know something out there exists, make sure it knows you exist too, but be respectful.
And thank you, Serena, for sharing that story. It's an interesting one because it's kind of one of those tropes about ghosts, the sort of tugging the blankets off, but you don't tend to hear about it as much as you would think, considering it is one of those tropes. And it's one of those things that you're petrified of as a child.
Yeah.
So I can see how it can be like really scary. But when you again, it's like a lot of these things that when you try and explain it to somebody, and they're like, oh, these horrible things are happening at my home. They're pulling my blankets off. They're closing the cupboard doors, or I can hear walking. It's terrifying when you experience it personally, but when you're trying to explain it to someone else,
you just can't get across the gravity of the
No.
situation, can you? And the thing is, it's when you're most vulnerable. When these things happen, it's when you're in bed, you're trying to sleep. This is the situation where you should be safest. Even the use of the word cocoon in her story, it you're snuggly, you're warm, you're trying to get to sleep, you're curled up, you need to feel secure so that you can relax. And that's how sort of insidious these experiences can be. They don't sound like a lot on paper, but it's that, not being able to sleep because something's messing with you in that way is incredibly draining and wearing. And I just wonder how the nightmares are sort of feed into that paranormal experience, because there does seem to be a lot of, even within this episode, there's people having paranormal experiences and people having nightmares that seem to be, they're not necessarily having the nightmares later on in life or at different times in their life or in different locations. It seems to almost tie in to a particular house or a particular period when they're having these experiences. And, these experiences are happening when these people are awake. I'm not saying that they're sort of interrelated in that way. I just feel it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about maybe presences affecting you in other ways.
And we're going to be staying on a similar topic for our next podcaster story. This one is from Nate and Joanna from the Stranger Than podcast, who tried very, very, very hard to remember that this is a no swearing podcast and didn't quite always succeed, but they did censor themselves afterwards, and it's the thought that counts.
Hello, everyone.
Hello there. We are Stranger Than Podcast.
I'm Joanna.
I'm Nate, and we are a not safe for work podcast that talks about...
We talk about paranormal activity, alien encounters, weird true crime.
Just, whatever. Now, we are not safe for work, and so Fitz and Lil asked us to not swear, so we won't be saying words like or bottom.
No, we will not. I will try my best, because I understand that Knock Once for Yes is supposed to be safe for all audiences. And God. Already. Okay.
Well, I suppose let's get to our stories.
Yes.
Would you like to start?
Okay, I'll talk about my sleep paralysis. To my knowledge, I've suffered from it since I was maybe like 14 or so.
That's just lovely.
I think I might have had an episode or two as a kid, but I can't remember enough about it.
Yeah, it's hard to remember stuff from when you were a child.
Especially when it's stuff involving like sleep and dreams.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah. But I definitely remember it starting at the house that we moved into when I was 14.
And that's the house that your parents currently live in, right?
Right. That I had lived in until not too long ago.
Yeah.
The bedroom that I was in was really big, and it had a really big walk-in closet. Like, seriously, a walk-in closet. I think the people who lived there before us were Mormon, and that's where they stored their like year's worth of food that they're supposed to have on hand or something like that. So I mean, it was like a pantry. So I had a queen size futon bed, and it fit in there, along with there was like built-in shelves, and then my bed just kind of like barely fit in there. But I slept in there, and the dream that I would have when the sleep paralysis was occurring. So it was kind of the typical things that happen when you have an episode of sleep paralysis where seems like you're awake, but you're actually not, but you can't move or speak.
Yeah.
And so I would wake up not being able to move or speak, and I would just see the shadow of a man in my room, but in like the main part of my room, and he's standing in like the doorway to my closet, like looking in at me. Like there's a light behind him, but I can't see.
Just a dark silhouette.
Yeah, just a dark silhouette. And it would always be terrifying, and I wouldn't be able to move or to scream or to do anything. I was just powerless. And I had this dream over and over and over the whole time I was there until I moved out. And after I moved out, I don't remember having any episodes of it. The next time that I actually had episodes of sleep paralysis was when I was back at my parents' house, like over a decade later. I didn't put my bed in that room specifically for that reason, because of that recurring, well, what I thought it was a nightmare at the time.
You've got bad thoughts of that. So you don't want to put your bed in a place where it's going to bring that back up.
Right. And I was convinced like maybe it's because it's like a little bit haunted in there, because it's a room where things tend to like just fall down on their own quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
It just seemed like a room where maybe there was something more to that particular space. And I just decided that I wasn't going to put my bed in there when I went back to that room several years later.
And you also had a larger bed, didn't you?
I did have a larger bed, yeah.
So it just wouldn't, there's also logistics of it not fitting.
I feel like even if it had, though, I would still have not opted to sleep in that room.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it really creeped me out after that. Not just the room just being there, it was fine, but just the idea of being there at night.
Yeah.
In the dark.
The bed in that closet where all the weirdo stuff has happened.
Also, there's a big hole in the ceiling that's only covered by like a scarf, like a bandana.
Oh, yeah, that's
because there used to be like a drywall thing you could push up to go into the attic, which is just like unfinished and rafters.
Yeah.
But that like broke in half a long time ago. And so my parents never got anything to put over it. It was just pinned up a cloth over it, basically.
Let it go.
And so there have been mice and rats infesting my parents' house like on and off. There's some wild animal that seems really big that is up. I've told you about the weird noises.
Yeah,
and
it's
the
probably
weird
a
animal
chupacabra.
noises. Yeah, so that was another thing. There's whatever is in there, and up in the attic, there's only this small piece of cloth between me and it, like dropping on to like my bed. Oh, sorry. That was another reason for not sleeping in there.
Yeah, you don't want rats or what have you dropping on you.
However, I did have an episode of it fairly recently.
That's not
still
really
in my
ideal.
room, but not in the closet part of my room. But it was intense. It was very intense. I was having. I don't know if any of you listening have seen The Grudge, or The Grudge 2, or any of those types of movies. The Ring.
Any of those like Japanese horror movies. Probably the Japanese and the American versions, since oftentimes they have at least a similar of the creepy imagery.
And one of the prominent creepy images and characters in those movies, both in the American version and the originals from Japan, is the Urei, the ghost that has like the hair that just kind of gets everywhere and will entangle you, and it's just creepy as the long black hair. So I wake up and I can't move or speak. And this hair is just like entwining my entire ceiling. Like almost like it's like a giant vine growing, but super quick, and like covering the entire ceiling. And soon it's just coming down the sides of my walls. And then it starts to go across the bed and envelop me and strangle me. And at that point, I suddenly speak, and the only thing that will make it like start receding is if I recite the poem, or maybe not the poem, but the saying from it that the kid says to to work on his stutter when he's a kid.
Oh, yeah.
He thrusts his fists against the post and still insists he sees the ghosts. And if I kept saying that over and over, the hair would start to recede. But every time I stopped, it would come back and start strangling me. And I think I even fully woke and came into consciousness, like shouting that.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was nuts.
No more scary movies for you.
I know, right? I think I had been on a kick, like a grudge kick or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was pretty nuts just to feel it like coming over me and like starting to choke me and strangle me, and I had to say the saying to like keep it away.
That's super weird.
Yeah.
Well, my story is not nearly as creepy as that. And it happened when I was a child. I was probably between 8 and 11, maybe. You know, young, elementary school, early junior high, maybe. And out behind my parents' house, both of our parents actually kind of live in a more woodsy area, though I'm closer to like big bunches of woods. And out behind my parents' house, kind of, there was these log tree forts. So it was like a log cabin, but it was made
Mhm.
with significantly smaller logs, probably 3 or 4 inch diameter logs, just nailed into all these trees. And there's all these. It was like a little Ewok fort, kind of.
Dude, who made that?
I have no idea. I've been playing there for a long time because as soon as I found them, we were like, well, we're gonna play here. This is awesome.
Yeah, that sounds like a totally awesome find.
Yeah, I don't know if it's still there. Probably not. Since I go back to my parents' house with somewhat of a frequency, and I've gone back to kind of how you get there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's since all fenced off and stuff. So I don't know if things still there. I'm sure it's just housing complexes.
That's the kind of thing, like, it's the best, most awesome discovery to make as a kid. But if I went out into someone's yard or like adjoining property of mine and I found all these things, I don't know, it would freak me out. I'd be like, oh my God, what psycho is like, huddled up and what are they doing
Right,
in these
right.
little like shelters and lean-tos that they have
Well,
been
they're in the
made?
trees, so you had to like climb ladders that they had nailed into other trees there to get into these things.
Even scarier, they're doing stuff that they don't want anyone to,
And it wasn't
be
too
able to
high up. I
get to
mean,
them.
you could see them pretty well. What I imagine what it was that
Or someplace
since
hard to escape
this
from.
little forested area had houses that were going all around, it was probably just some like dad went out there and was like, all right, Tommy and Judy, we're gonna build you a fort.
Yeah.
And like built his kids forts, and then they grew up and then no one cared anymore. Or maybe they did and we just never because we never ran into other kids there.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's just me being a terrible, bitter adult now that I would just like instantly be like, oh my God, what are these for?
I
Who
would
put
probably
these
climb
there?
into them still. But one particular day, it was the summertime, I was there with one of my friends. We were just hanging out, doing kid stuff, sitting there. And there was a path that went past it. And I saw a very small humanoid just sort of walk from a bush on one side across the path to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And I know what a chipmunk looks like, and there's not really any chipmunks in the area anyway. It didn't have a big bushy tail like a squirrel. It was a very tiny humanoid walking
Like an
across this
elf?
path. I don't know.
I think you told me about this before.
It was a distance away. It looked like some sort of like fairy sort of thing, but
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know. I know that those are mainly like an Irish deal, so maybe it was some sort of, who knows? Maybe I imagined it. I don't really think I did because that was back before I imagined things chemically.
Mhm.
So I don't see myself
So your brain was like nice and wholesome still, like
firing on all cylinders
Mhm.
still, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've remembered it since then. It's not like something I suddenly remembered. So who knows? It didn't appear to acknowledge our existence. It just ran across the path. It was maybe 20 feet down the path.
Did the friend see it?
No.
No, only
no,
you saw it.
Only I saw it.
Mm.
So that's pretty strange. Unless
Maybe elves are the ones who built the things.
maybe, although it's pretty big for those little things.
That's just weird. It's weird that those little structures were up and then you saw that thing. Like, I don't know. It just kind of enhances the weirdness of it.
It's
Because you never saw anyone else there. You don't know who built it. It was just this thing out there in
Yeah.
the woods. And then there's like this weird little creature that just goes into the bushes.
but only one time. Only ever saw it once.
Hmm.
Never before, obviously, and never since.
Well, maybe you got in big trouble for that. Be like,
Maybe.
dude, one of them saw you.
We know he saw you.
Did you see the look on that kid's face? He totally
Right.
saw you.
Well, thank you, Fitz and Lil. You guys are awesome. And I guess we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah, stay strange.
So that was Nate and Joanna of the Stranger Than podcast. Thank you for sharing your story, guys. And I just wanted to jump in with Nate's story first because it reminds me of something that you were saying earlier in the episode where we sort of pigeonhole all these UFO, alien, cryptid into different pockets. And his story could have been, could have been alien, could have been, could have been...
It could have been any of them,
Yeah.
couldn't it? Really. I mean, you've got the small humanoid. My brain immediately went to aliens, but then the way he was talking about it made it sound more like a cryptid. But then you've got the fact that he saw it and his friend didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So then we might be in the realms of apparition. So what is going on? Do we really need to be trying to slap these labels on things all the time? Because at the end of the day, we're just back to, we don't know what it was.
No, my general rule is if it's weird, I'm down for it.
Anything paranormal.
Yeah, anything spooky, weird, paranormal. You know, when somebody goes, "What on earth was that?"
That's when your ears prick up.
Yep,
Mhm.
I want to be there. I want to look into it.
So going back to Joanna's then, we've got this theme of dreams again.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that she was talking about the sleep paralysis. Now, obviously, sleep paralysis is a medical condition. It is brought on by stress. However, I just feel like there are so many incidences of people experiencing sleep paralysis solely alongside other paranormal activity.
Mm-hmm.
And to an extent, I've had that experience myself. I have had sleep paralysis, but it was in a situation where I was also experiencing paranormal activity. But having been in a house where there wasn't paranormal activity, it's not something that happened. Now, I'm not saying that sleep paralysis is at its heart paranormal. We know it's not. We know there's scientific reasons behind it. There's a medical reason behind it. But I feel like there's something else as well.
Well, it was interesting that it only happened at her parents' house.
Exactly.
Didn't happen anywhere else,
No.
just there.
And that's not the first incident I've heard. I've heard of so many people that have had a similar, they've been in one house, no sleep paralysis. They're in a house where they're having other daytime, fully awake, weird, unexplained, paranormal things happening. They're experiencing sleep paralysis.
Yep.
They leave the location, no sleep paralysis. So it feels like there must be some correlation. Now, you could argue that sleep paralysis is triggered by stress a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously living in a paranormally active environment is stressful. But then we've got this other strand that we need to bring into it where it's not just the sleep paralysis, it's people having weird, strange, vivid, oddly vivid dreams alongside paranormal activity. And that's something that we've both experienced as well. So, I mean, I'm not saying I have any idea how it all ties together, or I don't have a conclusion, unfortunately, to hand you, but I just feel like there's so many incidences where it sort of correlates and these things are happening alongside each other. But maybe that is such a wide subject that could actually be a full episode for us to cover in the future. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, actually, yes, I've had this happen. I've had really weird, vivid dreams alongside paranormal experiences or sleep paralysis tying in with activity, get in touch, let us know. We'll see if we can find where these strands sort of interconnect. It would be really interesting.
Definitely.
But I think that's all we've got time for this episode.
Yes, thank you to everyone that shared their story this episode. And don't forget that if you've got a story to share, please do get in touch through our website at knockOnceForYes.com. Thank you also to all the other podcasters that shared their stories, and you can likewise find links to their shows on the website, and we do recommend that you check them out. There you can also find links to all of our social media, so please join us on those, take a peek at some of the places we've been and have a chat. Thank you also to our patrons, whose support is vital for us to be able to keep producing the show. And if you'd like to support the show, please do consider becoming our patron, which you can do by following the links on our website or by visiting patreon.com/KOFY. Not Once for Yes is produced by my production company Narrative Audio, and if you have a podcast and you'd like to outsource your editing and post-production, then please do get in touch either through Not Once for Yes or narrativeaudio.com.
Well, our next episode will be our Christmas special, and there'll be dodgy quiz questions galore. If you have a Christmassy story, you've still got time to get in touch and share it for the episode. Until then, stay weird, stay spooky, and stay strange, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of Knock Once for Yes.
If I pay for